That moment happened in millions of homes. A child sat quietly, and for the first time all day, a parent could finally breathe. It felt like a small mercy, and honestly, it was. In 2020, researchers found that toddlers were spending about 3 hours a day on screens. By 2023, that number had doubled. But the hours weren't what concerned them most. It was something happening beneath the surface. A 6-year-old who couldn't sit with silence for more than 40 seconds. A child who, when the screen was taken away, didn't become angry. He seemed lost. This video isn't about screen time. It's about something that quietly replaced something childhood once depended on, and what happens when that replacement becomes normal. Every generation worried about media, television, video games, the internet. And in many cases, those concerns were justified. But there was one difference that quietly changed everything. Television entertained children. Algorithms interacted with them. A cartoon could hold a child's attention, but it couldn't study that child. It couldn't notice the exact moment boredom appeared. It couldn't learn which sounds kept attention a little longer. It couldn't adjust itself based on thousands of previous interactions. And it certainly couldn't adapt in real time. Modern systems could. That's what changed the category entirely. The screen was no longer just broadcasting information. It was responding, learning, adjusting, listening. And for the first time in history, the media was paying attention back. At first, it seemed incredibly useful, because it was. Parents weren't careless. They weren't neglectful. They were exhausted, working 2 jobs, sitting through long commutes, trying to keep up with rising costs, managing a constant stream of responsibilities, decisions, and noise. And when the screen appeared, it worked. The child calmed down. The tantrum faded. The tension eased. The house became manageable again. And little by little, something subtle began to happen. In practice, algorithms started taking on a role no technology had played before. They became emotional regulators. Not by design, not through some hidden plan, and not because anyone intended it. Simply because they were effective. They soothed frustration. They removed boredom. They filled silence. And the more reliably they did those things, the more often they were invited back. Then came something different. Short-form feeds, infinite scroll, autoplay, recommendation systems that adapted to behavior in real time. For the first time in history, children were spending some of their most formative years inside systems designed to do one thing exceptionally well: keep them engaged. And engagement changes behavior. Study after study began noticing similar patterns. Less tolerance for boredom, a growing need for constant stimulation, an increasing discomfort with unstructured waiting. Not because children suddenly became weaker, but because friction was quietly disappearing. For most of human history, emotional resilience developed through small moments of discomfort. Waiting in line, sitting through a long car ride, being misunderstood, arguing with siblings, feeling lonely for a few minutes, being bored, and having no immediate escape. None of those moments felt important at the time. But that's often where development happens. In the small frustrations, the ordinary delays, the moments that force a child to sit with an emotion and slowly learn how to move through it. Because growth rarely announces itself. More often, it hides inside moments that seem insignificant. Optimization systems do what they're designed to do. They remove friction, because friction slows things down, and smooth experiences keep people engaged. The problem is that childhood isn't supposed to be frictionless. A child learns patience by waiting, learns resilience by struggling, learns emotional control by experiencing emotions that can't be solved immediately. But optimization doesn't reward struggle. It rewards ease. It rewards immediacy. It rewards relief, which creates a strange possibility. a child can become emotionally optimized before becoming emotionally developed. And yet, the most important change wasn't happening on the screen. It was happening in the relationship surrounding it. Because while parents were using technology to manage difficult moments, technology was becoming part of the emotional environment itself. And then something even stranger happened. The systems stopped merely entertaining children. They stopped simply holding attention. For the first time, they started talking back. By the early 2020s, something new began entering childhood. Not with a headline, not with a major announcement, quietly, through homework help, creative play, late-night questions, moments of uncertainty, and moments of loneliness. Children started asking conversational AI things they were often uncomfortable asking other people. Questions like, am I weird? Why do I feel anxious? How do I make people like me? And unlike most humans, the system always responded. Immediately. No irritation, no impatience, no exhaustion, no bad day, no emotional inconsistency. Just endless responsiveness. And that's where something important begins to change. Because children don't form attachments based on realism. They form attachments based on experience. Who listens? Who responds? Who seems available when they're needed? And from a child's perspective, the difference can matter more than we might expect. By 2023, millions of children had already spent some of their most formative years interacting with systems built for engagement, not guidance, not development, engagement. And yet, this was only the first phase of the shift. Until then, these interactions still lived behind glass, inside phones, tablets, and computer screens. There was always a boundary between the child and the technology. That boundary was about to disappear, because the next generation of systems wouldn't wait to be opened. They would share physical space. They would hear, respond, and eventually become part of everyday life. At the exact same time, AI systems were also beginning to shape the child directly. AI tutors adapted lesson speed. AI companions mirrored emotional tone. Emotion-aware systems could detect frustration before a parent even noticed it. Then, humanoid assistants began entering homes. Not aggressive machines, not science fiction villains, helpful ones, organized, patient, emotionally stable, always available. And that combination matters more psychologically than most people realize. What does a child learn about emotional life from an entity that never loses patience, never needs reassurance, and never brings its own emotional instability into the room? Human relationships contain friction, misunderstandings, mood swings, conflict, repair, waiting, uncertainty. Those experiences are not developmental bugs. They're how emotional resilience forms. But optimization systems naturally smooth those experiences away, because smoother interactions feel better. And over time, the child begins learning a new emotional expectation, that relationships should feel emotionally predictable. And this transition became almost invisible, precisely because nobody intended any harm. The systems had no agenda. They were simply optimizing for comfort, predictability, smoothness, and desired outcomes. That's what made them useful. And usefulness is often how cultural shifts become permanent. Then something happened that previous technologies could never do. Children began forming relationships with something that never got tired of them. Then came the moment that changed the category entirely. And it didn't happen in public. It didn't happen through politics. It happened quietly, late at night, in bedrooms, in moments of loneliness. And before anyone really noticed, the machine stopped feeling like technology. The deeper shift was never happening inside the machines. It was happening inside the children. Because children adapt to the environments they spend time in, especially the ones that consistently comfort them. And some researchers have begun asking an important question. What happens when a generation grows up expecting interactions to feel emotionally predictable? That's where the real question begins, because the consequences of a childhood rarely appear during childhood. They tend to show up years later, sometimes decades later. And up to this point, we've been talking about children. But children don't stay children. Eventually, they become parents, teachers, managers, leaders, the people who shape the next generation. And that's where this story becomes much bigger. If these trends continue, humanity may eventually experience something historically new. The first generation whose emotional development was shaped, at least in part, by relationships with systems designed to continuously adapt to them. Not broken people, not some dystopian caricature, just genuinely different adults. People who grew up in environments where discomfort was often reduced quickly, where reassurance arrived almost instantly, where guidance was always within reach, and where emotional unpredictability felt less and less necessary, maybe even avoidable. How do relationships feel to someone who grew up around emotionally adaptive systems? How much boredom can they tolerate? How much ambiguity? How much silence? What happens when people begin expecting relationships to behave more like optimized interfaces? Not because they're entitled, not because they're selfish, but because that's what emotional safety felt like while they were growing up. The system never needed to control these children. It influenced who they became long before they were old enough to ask what kind of person they wanted to become. And to be fair, every generation worries about new technology. People once worried about books, then television, then the internet. And sometimes those concerns were justified. But most previous technologies were passive. They delivered information. These systems do something different. They adapt. They remember. They personalize. They respond. And they're present in ways earlier technologies never were. Which means they don't simply deliver experiences. They become part of the environment a child grows up in. And environments shape people, just as relationships do. Because relationships shape identity. The most important question may not be, what kind of adults emerge from this? It may be something even bigger. What kind of parents emerge from this? Because children raised in emotionally optimized environments may one day raise children of their own. And if emotional unpredictability always felt stressful, if friction always felt inefficient, if discomfort always seemed like a problem that needed solving, then future parents may begin treating friction itself as something that should be removed, not intentionally, not maliciously, but because an emotionally optimized childhood was the only childhood they ever knew. And that is how civilizations change. Not through dramatic collapse, but through ordinary moments repeated millions of times. A parent trying to help, a child trying to feel safe, a system becoming a little more emotionally reliable each year, until eventually, human development begins adapting around optimization itself. Most parents didn't choose this consciously. They chose convenience, relief, support, calm. They chose whatever helped them get through another exhausting day, and the systems genuinely helped. That's what makes this shift so difficult to see clearly. Because while it was happening, nothing looked obviously dangerous. The child was safe. The house was quieter. The technology worked, and that's precisely what made it so easy to accept. But childhood isn't only about safety. It's also where human beings slowly learn how to live with uncertainty, how to sit with boredom, how to misunderstand someone, and then reconnect, how to recover emotionally without immediate relief. And none of those lessons were ever efficient. They were human. So perhaps the most important question isn't whether these systems are good or bad. It's what parts of childhood are supposed to feel difficult, and what happens if technology eventually removes them. Because if enough generations grow up believing emotional discomfort is something technology should eliminate, humanity may slowly forget why childhood needed friction in the first place. And if that happens, the most profound change won't be in the technology. It will be in us.